And that's what we've seen over time in the coverage of the immigration issue between Mexico and the United States. It's very specific. It's a village to a very specific place. In New York, if you're from Puebla, you go to New York, right? Or if you're from Sonora, you're going to go to Arizona. Or, you know, the Oaxaqueños, the Oaxacan people are coming here to LA, right? So you have so many restaurants here. And I'm told that in 2006, when there was a tremendous economic crisis in Oaxaca, because of that economic crisis, they weren't able to get the ingredients to be able to make the proper recipes, right? So there's a real kind of flow, very specific. So I want to show you Tonatico, the Waukegan connection. And let's hear what one migrant has to tell us. He was recently returned to Mexico, not deported. He decided to return because he was just having a hard time making a decent living as a day laborer.
But traditionally, it's been the men who leave these desolate lands. This parched earth barely produces enough food for local consumption, and the people here can't rely on the government for loans or better paying jobs. Their only hope for a better future lies far beyond this region. Generations of the poorest Mexicans are learning a hard lesson. If they want a better home, food, and clothing, they must go north.
Se ha creado como un rito de paso entre los jóvenes.
It has become a kind of rite of passage among the youth. To take the step into adulthood involves migrating. You need to demonstrate that you are brave enough. It's become part of the culture to risk your life to go and earn dollars.
From here, there's no end in sight to the poverty that grips them. So many young people continue clinging to their dream of leaving, maybe to New York.
Aquí no hay donde trabajar. There is nowhere to work here. We have no hope of making a life here. It's been like that for ages.
As the United States invests billions more for security along its border with Mexico, these people will continue to raise their voices and pray that the burden of poverty they endure will one day be lifted. Franc Contreras, Al Jazeera, La Pastoria, Mexico.
Problems.
The expert that we heard there, one of the analysts that you heard in the story, says that this is becoming part of the culture, a rite of passage. If you're a young woman or a young man in certain parts of Mexico, you've seen so many adults around you go for so much time that it's become part of what you think that you need to do so that you too can become a provider for your family, for your community. So it takes on these other human dimensions. It's not just an economic phenomenon. It's also how you show your community that you care about them. You know, you do this, you put yourself at risk. You risk crossing through Mexico, which can be very risky in some places, and you do this thing now. I want to point out though that, remember, because of the U.S. economic crisis, a lot of Mexicans did go back, not the waves that we were told that were going to happen. We have seen a new phenomenon recently. I don't know if you've heard of this. Remittances, traditionally, of course, have gone in great amounts from the United States into Mexico. At one point, it was the third largest source of foreign capital, right up there with tourism, right up there with not as important as oil, but tourism. Imagine, it's a lot of money, that was being sent. In recent times, experts who monitor immigration have noted that some Mexicans are now sending remittances in the other direction. It's going from the south to the north because their families are unemployed. In the meat-cutting plants of Iowa, in the industrial zones around Chicago, in these areas around New York, they're unemployed because there's so many people unemployed in this country now, and these people are going to be among them. So now for them to be able to stay in the United States, pay the rent, do all that you need to do, it's expensive. Families back in Mexico are starting to send money back. That's a new twist in this. Finally, I want to show you a video report that we did from the border where I grew up, in Arizona, between Sonora and Arizona. I believe the report was done right around the time that Barack Obama was going to be sworn into office. And what we wanted to do was remind the world that there's a lot of euphoria and hope with the the onset of this new presidency that some changes could come, yes, but there's this immigration issue that continues to linger and it's unresolved. And people are still dying, to try to get into the United States without papers. So let me show you that. Right. So this story's going to load. We had a visit to the forensics medical expert in Tucson. We're told that this year the numbers of deaths there were so high that once again they had to store the bodies in refrigerated trucks because there wasn't enough space for the bodies this year again in Arizona. Even in times when economic crisis and unemployment is freezing jobs and making it difficult as an undocumented worker to be employed.
We think she probably died maybe 3 weeks to 3 months prior to the time she was recovering.
The unforgettable odor of a decomposing human body fills this laboratory at the Pima County Medical Examiner's office. These bones, bits of hair, and clothing are what's left of a young woman who was probably between the ages of 17 to 20. He uses her hip bones to determine age and gender. She apparently died of dehydration, attempting to cross some of the most rugged and inhospitable terrain in the Americas, where deaths of undocumented immigrants have been mounting. More than 1,600 people have died in the last 8 years, although an exact figure is hard to come by. Many are never identified because they carry no evidence of who they were or where they came from.
Most of these people who risk their life crossing the desert are poor. They haven't been to a dentist. They haven't been to a doctor. They don't have records the way a lot of Americans do.
So scores of Mexican families are left waiting for information on their missing sons and daughters, husbands and wives.
If the remains of this young woman cannot be identified, they'll be brought to this county cemetery and buried along with the bones of hundreds of other unidentified border crossers. Forensic experts say their work is made all the more difficult because they don't have access to databases of missing people from Mexico or the rest of Latin America.
This flag marks the spot where concerned Americans leave drinking water for the migrants coming through here. They say the U.S. government is to blame for many of the deaths. By sealing other parts of the border, Washington has forced migrants to attempt crossing the desert.
The government planned for people to die. It's not like they wanted necessarily people to die, but they knew that the strategies they were putting in place, the tactics they were using, were going to create a situation putting people in isolated, desolate areas where death would result. But they decided that those deaths would serve as a deterrent.
But that has not been the case. Increasing poverty and disparity of wealth in Mexico only give many more people reason to risk their lives for better paying jobs in the United States, whatever the dangers. Franc Contreras, Al Jazeera, Tucson, Arizona.
Years ago, people's risking their lives. You can see that the phenomenon is still going on, and now they add to it all of the politics that also create the barriers that people confront when they try to change their lives economically. And from Mexico, pretty much everywhere we ask, even conservative Mexicans who are more in line with kind of George Bush's economic policies and views on the world, even people of that sort had the idea that there's something having to do with racism here that's creating the laws that we're seeing in places like Arizona. And they wonder, how much more isolated can this country try to make itself, and negate the idea, the reality, really, that there is a flow and a need for this kind of work that one Mexican president, Vicente Fox, said at one point. He really upset a lot of people with this statement. They thought it was racist. He said that it's work that even African Americans wouldn't take, which was kind of a strange thing to say, but at the same time, I think what he was saying is it's work that no American will take. The underpaid work of being an undocumented immigrant worker. So this is kind of the view from Mexico. When we finish this part of the panel, if there are any questions you have, of course, I'd be happy to address those for you now at this stage. But I wanted to hand it now to Professor Jack to continue on.